All right, good morning. Can you guys all hear me? All right. So welcome to Monday morning of the CUPA conference. I'm expecting a great conference all the way through the entire week. How many guys is this your first CUPA conference? Raise your hand. Oh, good. So Monday morning classes, just to let you know, Monday morning classes are good because you're not quite hungover enough yet. By about Wednesday, Thursday, people start coming in, especially in the morning classes. Wednesday morning, Thursday morning is really, really hard because people come in. You've had hangovers for 2 or 3 days so far, and it gets a little bit tough. Monday morning, you're kind of bright-eyed. Hey, you haven't seen any classes yet, so it's a good class. My name, Jason did a little bit of an introduction. Good morning. My name is John Elkins. I do work for Sacramento County Hazmat currently. Just to let you know a little bit about myself, I started in this field in about 2000, 2001 kind of area. I started with Sacramento County. I was given underground storage tanks as my specialty. I did underground storage tanks. I did hazmat, haz waste, above ground tanks, and that's about it at the time. And then after about 3 or 4 years, the state hired me. And I worked with Laura Fisher, and I went to the state and with the water board and worked with them for about 4 years. Then I transferred for 2 more years. I transferred to the water board's Office of Enforcement and ran their enforcement division for about 2 years as a supervisor. About 4 years ago, I left the state and went back to Sacramento County, actually not as underground storage tanks, but as their emergency response supervisor. As of about 8 or 9 months ago, I was given additional duties of underground storage tanks as well. So now for Sacramento County, I do hazmat. I supervise hazmat, haz waste, ASTs, and USTs, and emergency response. Just a little bit as housekeeping issues. Make sure, take your phone. Please put it on vibrate, okay? I have 2 phones currently. Both of them are emergency response because I am the emergency response coordinator for Sacramento County. If it goes off, we are going to take a small break, and I have to go deal with some certain issues. But then we'll be coming back. I also, just to let you know, on the side, I also do have my own training company, Environmental Compliance Training Institute. Last year, I taught a series of classes here as that entity, not as a Sacramento County person, but as my own training company. Understand this, the classes are going to be different. When I work for myself, I could say anything I want. I can give you the dirt behind what the dirt was. I can tell you what the thinking was. I can tell you everything about everything. I can give you my own opinions. I have no boss except for myself, so if you don't like the way what I said, don't hire me again. It's a great thing. I like being my own boss. Understand this, today I'm not here as that entity. Today I'm here as a Sacramento County employee. So there's certain things I can't tell you. There's certain dirt I can't give you. There's certain questions that I can say, oh, okay, well, here's what the state line is. Here's what the state perspective is. And I have to kind of back off on my own opinions. Does that make sense? Some other stuff, we are being videotaped today. So we will be going back and forth. I do plan a little bit of activities. I like activities in my classes. However, because we're being videotaped, that's going to be cut way down. It's going to be cut way, way back. And some of you guys you're like, thank God, I don't have to go up and do group work. I don't have to do this. I don't have to answer questions. Understand this, when we do activities, it not only makes the class go by faster, but it also makes you learn better. And the ultimate reason why you're here and you're sitting in these chairs is to learn what's going on so when you're better in the field, okay? Because it's being videotaped, this course is not going to be as cool as it was last year, because we don't get to do those kind of things. But we're going to try to trudge through as much as we can. Originally, this was not the class that I was asked to do. Today's class is underground storage tanks and an intermediate course in basics. The original class I was asked to do months and months ago, they said I had a 2-hour block. Can you do something with an intermediate level, advanced level, that we have some stuff that we haven't seen? And I'm like, yeah, I've been out in the field lately. I've been doing inspections. I've been out there looking at different kind of stuff. I've been in the R counties. Okay, when I say R, there's 2 words in this language I cannot say. Does anyone know what those 2 words are? It's the V word and the R word. Now I've said it, if you guys have been in class before, you should know what the V word and the R word are. The V word, okay, is vulnerable. Does anyone, what is that word? Yes, I can't say it. Okay, maybe it's psychosomatic, but I cannot say that word. Okay, the second word is R word, which is R-U-R-A-L. Yes, it comes out like with me. Okay, I cannot say the R words. When I say the R word, I'm talking about R-U-R-A-L. Does that make sense? I've been doing a lot of inspections out in the R counties lately, and I've seen some things that are pretty awesome. So when they asked me to do a 2-hour class, I'm like, yeah, I got some good pictures, I got some good stuff, we're going to go here, and I designed this whole class. Well, a couple weeks ago, they came to me and said, no, we have a 4-hour block. We have a 4-hour block. You have to do a 4-hour class now. Well, I can't. I already did this. Okay, well, do the class you did last year. So there we go. Okay? So that's why we're here. This is not the class, originally class I designed. This is a class that kind of, we got pushed in because there was a 4-hour block. But how many guys took this class last year? Raise your hand. Okay, it's gonna be pretty much similar. If you haven't taken this class, we're gonna run through. We're gonna go through. This is an intermediate course in basics. We're gonna go over. It is a basic level class. However, it's gonna be more fast-paced. And for those of you who know me, I have a tendency to talk fast. Have I talked too fast already? No? You guys keeping up? Okay. Things that you need to understand about today. We're gonna talk about UST components. We're going to talk about the process of inspection. And then the process of inspection is huge. It's huge. I'm going to take you through A to Z. I'm going to take you from the first level, what you need to know when you walk on a site, to what you should be doing all the way through. Okay? It is going to be a fast-paced class. You're going to have to keep up. If you have never had an underground storage tank class before, or do not have any kind of field work experience, you might get kind of lost. And that's okay. That's okay. I'll be here all week. You can ask questions. But what I want to do is, in 4 hours, I cannot teach you how to do an inspection. I'm going to give you ideas. I want you to have thoughts. I want you to go back and say, you know what? That one thing when we talked about overfill, I didn't know that. I need to look at overfill again. You know why? Because overfill is one of the major things that everyone gets incorrect. Financial responsibility, another thing everyone gets incorrect. How many guys how many guys are inspectors? Raise your hand. How many guys are industry? Raise your hand. How many guys are tank owners? Raise your hand. Okay. Rules for the CUPA conference. Let me go back up real quick. Rules for the CUPA conference. We have a lot of inspectors here, and we have a few owner and operators. I encourage questions. Okay? However, if you do not start off a question that is, I have a site that, because I don't want to go over specific sites. If you have a specific site question, ask me afterwards, ask me during the break. I'll help you with everything I can. However, I've had issues between owner and operators where we have an inspector and the owner in the same class. And the owner raised their hand, asked a question, and said, well, you know what? What you just said is, what if I have this? Is that true? And I'm like, yeah, that's true. And they stand up and like, see, and they point out their inspector. Okay? I don't want fights back and forth between owner and operators and inspectors. Okay? We can deal with that afterwards. Again, we can deal with that during breaks, and we can deal with that afterwards. Okay? So rules for the CUPA conference. Typically, I only teach to owner and operators, to industry, and to inspectors. Bringing all you guys into one big room is kind of dangerous. Okay? It's kind of dangerous. So just understand what the rules are. You're going to be getting tons of information today. Tons of information. I don't expect that you're going to remember everything, but again, I want you to get you that idea of what goes wrong. We're going to be talking a lot about what goes wrong in the field. When I go in the field, I see tons and tons of issues that are overlooked. Okay? Any questions so far before we move on? All right. Like I already said, this is a quasi-basic intermediate level class. If you are a basic person, you might get lost. If you're an advanced person, you might get kind of bored. Okay? I try to make it fun, but you know what? If you know everything, you've been in the field for 10 years, probably shouldn't be sitting in a basic intermediate level class, unless you're just trying to get here, getting your 4 hours for certification. In which case, I would say, you know what? There's another 22 hours during the conference for USTs. So I'd say, you know what? If you're like deep into it, maybe you want to kind of leave the class and go to another one for the last 22 hours. First thing we need to understand is you need to understand laws and regulations. If you're an owner-operator, These are what's going to be held, the standard you're going to be held to. Industry, this is what if you're a compliance manager, this is the standards you're going to be held to. Inspectors, this is what you're inspecting. This is the level you're handling people to. This is the standard, okay? Now, what is a law? Now, we have no internet. Again, if I could tell you about the last 11 hours, it's been trying to get this whole class put together and up here and everything. It has been quite a ride. I haven't hardly gotten any sleep. Maybe that's why I'm talking so fast. I'm kind of on adrenaline. But we had no internet here, okay? Typically, what I like to show here is Schoolhouse Rock. How many guys are old enough? Oh, no, I'm sorry. How many guys are my age or older and remember what Schoolhouse Rock is? Wasn't that the coolest series? You know what? For me, when on a Saturday morning, because again, when I'm old enough where cartoons weren't on 24/7. Cartoons were only on Saturday mornings. So 6 o'clock in the morning, Saturday morning, I'd run out, wake up early, run out to the one TV we had in the house, and go watch my cartoons before my parents got up. And you know what was always on? Schoolhouse Rock, okay? And you know what? There was one thing called I'm Just a Bill. How many guys remember I'm Just a Bill? Yeah, wasn't that cool? Wasn't that an amazing one? That actually, when you read that, this YouTube link actually goes to Schoolhouse Rock to I Am a Bill. And you know what? It takes you through, it is 100% accurate. It is 100% accurate. If you go back and watch that, if you haven't seen it in a while, go back and Google it, go to YouTube, put it on, and watch it. Because you know the process of a bill, and the process of how a law becomes a law, is 100% accurate in that Schoolhouse Rock. 100% accurate. Okay? One of the problems we have with regulation and law is people say, oh, well, change the law. Change the law. That's a stupid law. Change the law. Change the law. How easy is it to change a law? Not very easy. It is highly difficult. Okay? Because what has to happen? What's the first thing that has to happen? You have to have an idea to change the law. So someone gets an idea to change the law. Then what has to happen? A congressman, either on the Assembly or the Senate side, has to pick up that idea and say, you know what, that's an awesome idea. I'm going to sponsor a bill. And then what do? Then they write a bill. And then what happens? Whatever side of Congress they're in, that bill goes to the floor. And then they put it up there. And then what does it go to? Then it goes into committee. Then it goes into subcommittee. And they vote, and they change it, and they change it, and they vote, and it goes back and forth. And finally gets to the floor of that one side of Senate, or the one side of Congress, and they pass it. And then what does it do? It goes to the other side where it repeats. It goes into committee. It goes into subcommittee. It goes on the floor for a vote. And if they change it all, what does it have to do? Go back to the original one. And if they change it again, what has to happen? It has to go back and forth until they do what? Until they agree on it. And then what does it do? Then it has to get pushed up to who? Either the governor or the president, depending if you're going state or federal, right? And then what can he do? He could sign it or he could veto it. Or not sign it. They're all different. Okay? That is the process of a bill. And that's how a bill becomes a law. That takes time. That takes a lot of time. Changing a law is not easy. Now, laws are supposed to be doing what? Laws are supposed to be written vague and wide, or very specific and very narrow. Give me some love here, guys. Talk to me a little bit. I'm not going to be up here for 4 hours with no interaction. What? Laws should be written in the perfect world, and maybe I'm stepping outside of my Sacramento County area a little bit, but I've studied a lot of law. Laws are meant to be written wide and vague. There are huge issues when laws become very specific and very narrow. Now, how many guys know about it's not underground storage tanks, but the 6.95 change for HAZMAT, Hazardous Materials Business Plan? You guys all know that went out through? Like 2 or 3 bills passed, laws passed, right? What happened in that, as an example, what happened in that bill? Did things become from wide to narrow, or narrow to wide, narrow to wide? They went from very wide, and when they rewrote 6.95, what happened? It became very narrow, okay? Which is not a bad thing, because what they did, I was actually part of that committee. What they actually did is they brought people in from industry, they brought people from different industries, regulators, inspectors, everyone came together and kind of hammered it out. That's not normally the process. Sometimes you get a site, a very politically strong site, a very wealthy site. And they say, you know what? I'm tired of being hammered by this law. So what do? They go to a senator. They go to a congressman. Hey, change this law. The law, they give them a donation or whatever, something goes on behind the scenes, and that senator or that assemblyman puts up a law, puts up a bill. It becomes a law. And they write it specifically for what? That one site. They write the law specifically for that one site. However, and for that one site, it's perfect because that's what they wanted. But what about the ripple effects? What about the effects of the other 8,000 facilities that had that same incident? Now that has to change because that one facility wanted the change. Does that make sense? Have I lost you? Laws are supposed to be written wide and vague so they can encompass every type of situation. Because once a law is written, it's done. And it takes a lot to get it done, to get it changed. I have written, when I was with the water board, I have written a lot of bills. Not one ever passed. Maybe that's because I wrote bad bills. I don't know. Okay? But I've written a lot of bills. A lot. They went different levels of approval before they all got killed, but you know what? They all got killed. It is not easy to pass a law. Now, laws are enacted by the legislature. They are enforceable requirements and can give specific agencies authority to create regulations to clarify the law. Now, the difference between a law and regulation, a law is what the legislature enacts, and a regulation is what? Are regulations supposed to be wide and vague or narrow and specific? Narrow and specific, okay? Due process, right? Checks and balances, checks and balances. Our whole country is built on checks and balances, correct? You guys know the term checks and balances? It's what our country is based on, our constitution is based on. Now, when a law is written and a law is passed, where's those checks and balances? Do you and I have a say in a law or a bill being passed? Do we have anything? Where's our checks and balances? Who we elect. We elect the legislature. That is our checks and balances. Okay? Now, regulation. Where's our checks and balances by regulation? Because in that law that just passed, the law gives an agency, like a state agency, authority to write a regulation, to specify or to clarify what the law says. Now, what about our due process? What about our checks and balances in regulations? Where does that come from? Review process, also called the comment period. Okay, comment. How many guys in here have commented on a regulation? Maybe 8. Okay, maybe 8. And there's what? At least 60, 70, 80 people in here? Okay, maybe 10% of you guys. Is that good? Should you be, if you are a regulator, if you're an owner, if you're in industry, and you see a regulation that's coming out, should you comment on it? Yes, you should. Instead of being the people like, you know what, the water board or DTSC or fire marshals, my God, they write the crappiest regulations ever. Well, did you say anything to them? Did you let them know before that regulation was finalized that that's a crappy regulation? Do they have to answer you? If you write a comment, do they have to answer you? Yes, they do. Every comment has to have an answer. And it can't be just okay, we thought about it, thank you. No. It has to be an in-depth answer. And you know why I know that? Because I have answered every comment on regulations that I've passed. Every comment. And when there is like 1,628 comments, that is a lot of work. But you know what? It's needed. Because that's where the checks and balances are. Those 1,628 comments, those give the state a better idea. Hey, you know what? Maybe we didn't think about that. Maybe we didn't think about that. You know, that's a really good idea. We should clarify that. We should write something in that works for it. They do not just disregard your comments. Okay? And when regulations come out, you should be adamant about your public comments. All right. Now we have a third level. So in law, the way law works, you have the federal law, Then you have the state law, right? And we're talking about laws, okay? You have the federal law and the state law. So every state has to adopt what the federal law says. They have no choice. State law, if the state wants to be more strict than the federal code, then they say, hey, you know what? We can enact state laws that are as stringent but can be more stringent than the federal code. Then you write regulations. Then the third level you have is local ordinances and county codes. Again, the local ordinances and county codes have to be as stringent as the state law or state regulation, but can be more stringent. How many of you guys in here have actual local ordinances or county codes for underground storage tanks that are more stringent than the state code or state regulation? That's good. Maybe 3. I know of 2 counties in California that have more stringent regulations for underground storage tank than the state code, laws and regulations. Only 2. I might be wrong. There might be 3, 4, but I only know of 2. Okay? Now, local or county codes are city agents may adopt more stringent standards. Local ordinances are available at city and codes, yada, 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 yada. There's a big thing between a county code and a city code and a county, what's the P word? Policy. Policy. Are county codes and county ordinances, are they enforceable? Yes. Policies. Are policies enforceable? Okay? It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing. I've done a ton of enforcement in my life. I've done a ton of UST enforcement in my life. I've been on the stand. I have been an expert witness, and I've been deposed. How many guys have actually done those 3 things? Is that a fun thing? No. Actually, you know what? It is quite a fun thing. After my first time, I love it. I love it. I love going in there. I love fighting. I love the debate. I love going back and forth. But you know, my first time on the stand, when I got cross-examined by the guy, and he rattled me so bad, that after about 2 hours of just being grilled, if you would have said, Mr. Elkins, is 2 plus 2, does that equal 4? You know, I would have said, I think it does, but I can't be quite. Are you sure? I don't know. Yes, no. 1, 2, 3. I don't know. Okay? It is horrible. It's a horrible experience. And now I love it because I learned my lesson. I understand where policies are. I understand what laws are. And I understand where regulations are. How many of you guys do enforcement in here? You guys all do enforcement in here. Okay? You need to know what the law says, you need to know what the regulation says, and you need to know what your county policies and local ordinances are. Because if you're on the stand and you just brought an enforcement case against somebody and it's based on a policy, and you have a defense attorney who knows what he's talking about, what's the first thing he's going to hammer? That policy. Is that law? Is that regulation? Show me where it says that. Where's your county code? Where's your county ordinance? Where's the state law? Does it say in there? Where's it at? Where's it at? Where's it at? And what do you have on the stand that's in your favor? You're an expert and your credibility. Does this judge know anything about UST law or environmental law? Probably not. So what's he banking on? That you're the expert. You're the person in the field. You're the person who goes and sees these things all the time. And now if you're getting rattled because you don't know what a policy is versus a county code or a law or a regulation, what does that do to your credibility? You just took a lot of shots. Okay? Now, in enforcement, the AAO process, the administrative enforcement process, which typically everyone uses, okay, came out with what bill? 2481. How old is 2481? About 11 years old now. Okay? So about the last 11 years, people have been bringing huge amounts of administrative enforcement orders against facilities. Now, has there been a loss in court? Has a jurisdiction brought a case. It went to court. It actually went litigated. They did not settle in the AEO process. It actually was litigated and lost on fact. On fact. When I say lost on fact, what does that mean? They lost because their expert witness was not good? They lost because it was kind of a gray area? What does loss on fact mean? It means they brought a violation against a facility and the judge said, you had no proof. What you're showing me here does not equal this. Is that a hard loss? Yes. Have we lost? Has there been one loss yet? I would say it's very possible that we had a loss. Okay? It's very possible we had a loss. One loss. Okay? Is that a good thing? No. Loss on fact is not a good thing. Okay? You need to know what the policies are. You need to know what law and regulation are. Any questions so far? All right. Moving on. UST components. More things you need to know before you go out in the field. You need to know what you're looking at. So, UST components. What are these things? What are they? Yell it out. Tanks. Those are tanks. What kind of tanks? Concrete? No, they're not concrete, actually. They're actually not concrete. They might look concrete, but they're not. That's a good point. I never even thought of them as possibly concrete, but they're not. What are they? Steel. They're steel. They're steel. Okay? So what's the first thing we're looking at? When we look at a tank, what's the first thing we're looking at? What's it made of? Concrete, steel, or what's the other one? Fiberglass. Okay? What about wood? Are there wood tanks out there? Yes? Yes, there are. When about 12 years ago, I pulled out it was supposedly a 45,000 gallon redwood tank that was put in like the 20s. Now, when we dug it up, there were some pieces of wood kind of all over, but that's about it. The tank removal was pretty much just removing some of the pieces of wood that were still left. Okay? So what's the first thing we look at when you look at a tank? We look at what's composed of. Why? Why do we care about what the tank is made of? Well, it can. It can affect the monitoring. Yes? Yes. Because we bury them. Right? And there's something that happens to them when we can't see them. What does everything have a tendency to do at some point? Decay, fail, and leak. Now, if it's on an above-ground tank, we say, hey, man, there's a big hole in that tank. Okay? It's pretty easy to notice. On underground tanks, we don't know. So one of the things we want to look for is what it's made of. These are steel. What is this? Can anyone tell me what this is? This is an underground storage tank. This is an underground storage tank. When you look, nice laser pointer. When you look here, this is the ground. Okay? These are buried tanks. These are buried tanks. Now, how big a tanks do you think these are? I think they're about 2 million gallons. Okay? Do you know what's stored in these underground storage tanks? What was that? Not jet fuel. Not jet fuel. Jet fuel is so much more mundane than this stuff. What is this? Nope. Nope. What? Nope. Nope. Nuclear waste. These are nuclear waste tanks. Underground storage tanks, about 2 million gallons each. About 2 million gallons each. And they're only leaking they've only leaked, there's 174 tanks, I think, like this, in this one area. It's about 174. And each one about 1 million to 2 million gallons. And they are all full of highly toxic nuclear waste. But they've only lost out of all of it, they think they've only lost like 4 or 5 million gallons has been released. Okay? And it might sound funny, but it's 100% true. Okay? So sometimes when we look at underground storage tanks, we think of gas, diesel, maybe jet, maybe oil. How about highly toxic nuclear waste? That's so bad in these tanks, they said, I saw a news report on it, that toxic waste is so bad that 1 cup in this room would kill everyone within like 30, 40 seconds. Yes?
Is it in California?
No. No, it's not. It's north of us. It's north of us. It's not too far north, but it's north. Okay? By the way, let's back up a little bit. How did the underground storage tank program start? Why are you all here? When did it start? Can anyone tell me when? No, not 74. It's about mid-80s, about 83, 84. Why? What? It was a 60 Minutes report. The reason you were here is because 60 Minutes did a story on a town in California that people were getting sick from releases from underground storage tanks. Do you guys know that? That's why you're here. Because 60 Minutes did a report on leaking tanks, and they were only gas and diesel, but people was getting into the groundwater, was getting into the water supply, and people were getting sick. 60 Minutes did a piece on it. I've tried to find that piece. I can't find it anywhere. Okay, 60 Minutes doesn't have it anymore. However, when you look at people's different states, when you look at their 50-year address for what happened in the last 50 years, the great things that some of these governors are saying about their state. One of the things they said, especially in the East Coast, what they say is, you know what? We have underground storage tanks regulation. Why would a governor of a state say, you know what? One of the greatest accomplishments in the last 50 years was that we got underground storage tank regulations. Because people in his area were getting what? Were getting sick. Now, when we go forward, understand this. If you have a single-wall tank in the ground, is it legal? Up until 2025 now. Is it legal? What was that?
If you're doing all your monitoring.
Yes, it's legal. It's still legal. You can, there's always a qualifier of as long as you're in compliance. Okay? As long as you're in compliance, yes, that's legal. Now, we test tanks to what level? Our annual tests on tanks are, I'm talking to the experienced people here, because I know you guys are on here. What level are we testing tanks to? Point what? Gallons per hour. 0.1. Okay? 0.1 gallon per hour leak rate. You pass your test, boom, you're good. So what happens if you're testing at a 0.0, what happens if your tank is leaking at 0.05 gallons per hour? You what? You pass. Boom, we're good. How much are you leaking a year at 0.05 gallons per hour? Does anyone know? Has anyone done the math? Now, hold on. I know this is going to be a huge difference, but I forgot what exactly it is. It's either we had an engineer working for the water board, and he calculated it either, they're both horrible numbers, don't get me wrong, but I can't remember which one it is. It's either 50 gallons a year or 500 gallons a year. But let's take the lower number. Let's say 0.05 gallon per hour leak rate is 50 gallons per year. Your single wall underground storage tank's been there for how long? Has to be installed before 84, right? So how many years are we talking about? Almost 30 years, or actually 31 years, right? How much at 50 gallons per year? How much is that? Is that a substantial release? Yeah, and you know what? You're still legal. You're still good because you're passing every test. Now, when you pull that underground storage tank out within the next 9 years, what's going to happen? What are you going to have to do? A lot of contamination, okay? But one things you need to look at when we're talking about underground storage tanks is why do we have these regulations? Because things like this, and it doesn't have to be highly toxic nuclear waste. It could just be oil and gas, but they leak. They get into the water supply. People drink it. People get sick. Any questions? All right. So now, here's our little diagram. We're going to go over components of everything So right now we've talked about underground tanks. We talked about the reason we're here. We're talking about what we're going to look at now. Now we're going to look at more tanks, apparently. Okay, what kind of tank is this? Steel tank. How do we know it's a steel tank? Because it says steel tank. What else? No ribs and flat ends. Okay, so it has flat ends. There's no ribs on it. That's great when you put the tank in the ground. However, when you go to a new site and you look down, how do you know what kind of tank's in the ground? You trust what forms? The tank forms. Never, ever, ever trust a tank form. Okay? Never, ever, ever. If you ever trust your tank forms, you should be let go. You should go do like above ground tanks. Okay? They are like 85% wrong every year. Every year. Okay? So if you go to a site that's in the ground, you can't see flat ends. How do you know? How do you know this is a steel tank? But when it's buried and you can't see flat ends, how do you know when you're looking in the hole down in the ground, how do you know that's a steel tank? You trust your tank forms? What's the answer to that question? No, thank you. How do you know? Well, that's a whole separate issue. Whole separate issue. How do we know this is steel? Two ways. When you look in the hole, in the sump, there's no ribs. Can you see the ribs when you look in the sump? Sometimes. However, if your sump has a false bottom, you cannot see the top of the tank. And then we're what? We're back to trusting our forms? No. Okay, every time I ask you to trust your form, you say no. Do you trust your forms? No. Thank you. All right, so how do we know when this is buried in the ground? When you look at the sensor, what kind of sensor is it? It's a what? It's a 420, which looks like a bell sensor, right? It's a straight drop tube. The drop tube goes straight down. The way steel tanks are made is that the inner tank is about this big. It's a smaller tank. And actually, on this other end, there's about a 4 to 6 inch vacant area. The tanks are put in the ground on an angle, and the sensor goes straight down to the bottom. If you pull out a wrap sensor, it is not a steel tank. Does that make sense? Oh. What kind of tank is this? It's a steel tank. What kind of specialized steel tank is this? It's right here. What's this called? STIP-3, a STIP-3 tank. Have you guys ever heard of STIP-3s? You should. How many guys have STIP-3s in your jurisdiction? All of you raise your hand. Right now. All you raise. This is active participation. Everyone raise your hand. Because you all do. These were huge when? These were huge in the 80s and early 90s. Okay? What is special about a STIP-3? What? Has an anode. There's 3 levels of cathodic protection or corrosion prevention. Okay? What's the first level? What's the P1? Isolation of bungs. Okay? Isolation of bungs. The bungs on top of the tank are isolated. Now, on every double wall tank, is there a single wall component? Have you ever thought about that? Is there on a double wall tank? I can tell you this is a double wall tank right now. It's a double wall tank. Where is the single wall components? The what? The riser would be the piping. But the riser is connected to what? The bung. These bungs are single wall components. There's about a 4 or 6 inch area on top of the tank that is single walled. How many of you guys knew that? On every double wall tank, there's a single wall 4 to 6 inch strip on top of the tank that is single walled. Why is that there? Because that's how the two tanks come together. Okay? The inner tank doesn't float. It's not magic inside the inner tank. The inner tank has to attach to the outer tank somehow, and it attaches right there on top of the tank. Your top of your tank is single-walled. Okay? So isolation of these bungs is the first is P1. What's P2? What's the second level of corrosion prevention for a step 3 tank? Someone, give it to me. Sacrificial anode, right there. Boom, right there. Boom, sacrificial anode. Now, what is a sacrificial anode?
Metal that rusts faster than the target metal.
Okay, so it's a corrosion prevention method, right? So how does it work? So this little piece of what? Typically, anodes are what? Zinc or magnesium, either one. Okay, basically how this works is that who can give me a 3rd grade level how corrosion works? How does corrosion work? Okay, what attacks at weakest points? Oxidation. Oxidation is kind of maybe a 9th grade word. Okay, give me like a 3rd, maybe a 6th grade. Rust. Okay, a rust. What causes rust? Why do things magically rust? Electrons. Okay, so electrons, I would say is like a 6th grade word. I'm good with that. Okay, that's about the way you need to know what electrons are to know what corrosion is. I mean, I can't go any more basic than that. At least I can. Okay, so electrons. How does corrosion work with steel? What does electrons in steel equal to corrosion? How does it work? It what? You have fuel sitting in tank or moving through tanks. What does the fuel do to the electrons of the steel? It pulls them away. When it's pulling the electrons away, what does that cause the steel to do? Decay and rust and develop what? Holes. That's how it works. Fuel pulls the electrons. The electrons, the steel, because it's dropping electrons, it starts to decay, starts to rust, and you have a hole in it. Does that make sense? Anodes. The way anodes work is that the anode, the magnesium or the zinc strip, corrodes faster or gives its electrons to the fuel faster than what? Than the steel does. And so what corrodes? The anode. This corrodes and the steel doesn't. Until what point? Until the anode is gone. Okay? Now, why is it so important to understand the anode? And that this is a step 3 tank and not just a normal steel tank? Because one of the corrosion prevention methods is what? This anode, and what do you have to do every 3 years? You have to test it to make sure it's still there and it's still viable. Okay? When I was in Sacramento the first time, and I was a normal inspector, I didn't care. I didn't know about step 3 tanks. I didn't know about any of this stuff. I looked down in the hole. I saw it was a steel tank. I looked at the sensor. It was a steel tank. I'm good. We hired this girl from North Carolina, okay? She came in, and she was like a windstorm. She just kind of took things and bam, 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 bam. Now, you need to understand what California regulations are compared to the rest of the nation, okay? There's about 42 of the 50 states that actually just adopt the federal code. They have no state-specific UST law or regulations, okay? Now, going back to the federal code, how many guys have studied the federal code? Not one person's looked at the federal code? Parts 280, 281? So 40 CFR, no one's looked at it? Okay, you should. Why? Because that's the federal standard. But you say in California, hey man, California, we have all these state standards that are more stringent, so we're good. Yes, but you still need to understand what the bases are. Now, in California, can you put a tank in the ground without a permit? Okay. In the rest of the nation, can you put a tank in the ground without a permit? Yes, you can. When do you need to know? When do you need to let the local authority know or the state authority know that the tank's in the ground? 30 days after operation. Not after, not before operation, not after tank's in the ground. 30 days after operations commence, you must let the regulatory know that's in the ground. Is that a lot less stringent than what we do? It's a lot less stringent. Okay. Can you put a single wall tank in the ground right now? Can you put a single wall steel tank in the ground with single wall steel pipe right now? In the rest of the country? Yes. Yes, 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 you can. Yes, you can. Okay? In about 42 of the states, you can put a single-wall steel tank in the ground with single-wall steel pipe. Boom. And when you let everyone know, 30 days after you start using it. And what are you testing to? 0.1 gallon per hour leak rate. Maybe. Because if you put a backup generator in the ground in the rest of the country, that tank is what? Exempt from regulation. Exempt. So if you put a backup generator tank in the ground, hey, you don't have any law or regulations over you. You can leak as much as you want. You're not even testing to a 0.1 gallon per hour leak rate. You're not. You lose fuel, hey, man, you put more fuel in. We're all good. Okay? Now, when this girl from North Carolina came to the ground, because she was in a state that just does a federal code, she came in, and what's her two top priorities were corrosion prevention and financial responsibility. Why were her two, every time the first two things she looked at on a site was corrosion prevention and financial responsibility. Things in California we don't look at. Why did she hammer on it so bad? Because she's used to single wall tanks. In her mind, in California, the way is, hey, if you leak, then your financial responsibility, you'll do the state fund. Okay? In the rest of the country, it's not if, it's when you leak. And what causes the leaks? Corrosion. So the first thing she always looked for was corrosion. Second thing was financial responsibility, because she knew that when they leaked, they had to pay for it. Right? So here, when she came into my jurisdiction in California, I'm like, yeah, that's a steel tank. It has this dielectric coating. By the way, P3, the third level, is this dielectric coating, corrosion prevention coating. Okay? I look down the tank, I'm looking, yeah, that's a dielectric coating. It's a steel tank, we're all good. It has corrosion prevention. She's like, no. She went back in those forms that I hate. She went back 10, 20 years of those forms that I hate. And she said, oh, I found where it says they put a STIP 3 tank in. And I was like, well, oh yeah. Yeah, it's good. She's like, well, did you ever have them test the anode? What anode? She's like, well, it's a STIP 3 tank. Oh yeah. Do you know what that means? No. And she's like, and so she told me about all this kind of stuff. We found about something like 15, 20, by just going back in the forms, years back in the forms, we found 20 to 30 references for STIP 3 tanks. So every place we found that had a reference to installing a STIP 3 tank, we had them to go do the corrosion prevention method. But again, this is 20 to 30 years after it was, or at the time, about 20 years after it had been put in the ground. Okay. One thing you should do when you go back to your facilities, you see a black dielectric coating in the ground. You should look back at your form, say, is this a STIP 3 tank? Because if it is, they are required to do a corrosion prevention test every 3 years. All right. Any questions so far? Now, I know you're looking at your book and you're like, oh my God, we're an hour into the class and we're only like 4 or 5 slides in. We have 182 left to go. Don't give up on me yet. Okay? Don't give up on me yet. Glass steel tanks. This is a glass steel 2 tank. Okay? And what's the difference between a glass steel 2 and a glass steel 1? Who can tell me? Or do we even care? Glass steel, there's 2 different kinds of tanks. There's a glass steel 2 tank and a glass steel 1 tank. What's the difference? Some of my senior people, what is the difference? Before I start calling you out, and I will start calling you guys out. You guys have been in my class for years. I've talked about this many times. What's the difference between glass steel 1 and glass steel 2? One of them has a steel primary tank and a steel secondary tank. One of them has a steel primary tank and a what kind of secondary? A jacket tank, a fiberglass jacket. Okay? Why do we care? Why do we care? Corrosion, because on the one with the secondary tank that is steel, it has corrosion prevention, but it also has a wrap around it, so it doesn't matter, right? Because the steel tank, the secondary steel tank, has a fiberglass wrap around it, so that is the corrosion prevention method. However, when that tank comes on site, what do they have to do? They have to do a holiday test. And with a jacketed tank, they don't. Okay, what is a holiday test? Who can tell me what a holiday test is?
It's a test to determine if they have complete perfection.
And how does it work? Yeah, it's a corrosion prevention method test that shows, hey, do you have any holes in the jacket or the fiberglass wrap? How do they do it?
They run a squeegee. It looks like a giant squeegee with metal. They put about 20,000 volts across it, and they're supposed to cover the entire area of the tank. But this particular squeegee, if there's a spark, they don't have a good.
Ah, there's the big word. What's that big word? Spark test. So you're taking a tank that has fuel in it and you're sparking it to make sure there's no holes in it.
Better not have fuel in it when it's delivered.
What was that?
It better not have fuel in it when it's delivered.
Very good. This tank has not had any hazardous material or anything volatile in it, so you're good. You're very good. Yes?
Another thing, I think that tank, that double-wall steel tank, it's in the Enviro 16.
There is one like that too, but on glass steel, there's glass steel 1 with glass steel 2s. There is a different, that's a whole different company. There is though. You're right.
Modern makes an Enviro. It's Enviro 16. It's a double-wall steel.
Okay, I have to check on that. I have to see if they change the name. All I know is I know the glass steel 1, glass steel 2s, there's a difference. Okay, but they could have changed the name or may have another one that's Enviro. I have to check on that. Now, going back to some more things about a spark test. When do we see spark tests at different places? When's another time we see a spark test? With underground storage tanks. Lining inspections. Lining inspections. And we're not going to talk too much about lining here, but understand this. If you have a single wall steel tank that had a liner put in, okay, what's a liner? It's where they cut a hole on top of the tank, they go inside and they spray this blue stuff or this green stuff inside the tank. Okay? The first 10 years, you have to go do a test, and every 5 years after that, you do a test. And they have to run a series, I think, 8 tests. And one of the tests is they go inside the tank. Some guy goes inside the tank, and they do a holiday test around the liner to make sure it has no holes. Now think about that. You're going into a tank, into the hole in the tank. You're going inside this tank that already did have hazardous materials in it now, and you are sparking it to see if there's any holes. Does that make a lot of sense? Is that a brave person who does that? Yes, that is. Do people die from this test? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. We've had deaths on this test. Okay? Understand, if you have a single wall tank with a liner and someone's showing you their 5-year test for their tank lining inspection, understand this. Someone should have gone inside that tank and sparked it all over the place to make sure that there's no holes in that lining. Okay? When this came up, people were saying, John, while I was working with the state, they said, you know what, this is stupid. This is a ridiculous test. We don't have to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to require people to do it. People are going to die. I'm like, I understand. I did a bunch of research, and it's required. Why is it required? Because the federal code says you have to do it like that. Actually, the federal code does not say you have to do it like that. The federal code used to say we have to do the spark test for lining tests. After about 2 years, the lining industry went to the federal government and said, hey, you know what? This test is dangerous and it's not needed. The feds looked at the test and said, yeah, you know what? I don't want people dying, and they removed that requirement. Why does California state still say you have to do it? Because at the time of the federal code, we adopted 100% what the federal code says. So when they changed it 2 years later, California never looked at it. Frankly, California never knew that they removed that requirement, and California still has that test. So as more stringent as California is, we are more stringent that we stick people inside tanks that are lined and have them do a spark test. Okay? Understand this as a safety issue for your regulators and for your owner operators. When you do send a guy in the test, when you do send him in the hole, and he is sparking the test, where should you not be? There, on the whole site, it's probably a good idea, okay? But if you're on site, where should you not be? Looking inside the hole. Because every time someone's in a hole, what do? Hey, what you doing in there? Okay? Have you guys ever been inside a tank? That's awesome. You've been in one? That's awesome. We had a 60,000 gallon tank, a couple of 60,000 gallon tanks removed, single wall tanks. And you know what? You know how big that tank was? It was over 12 feet tall and over like 60 feet long. Okay? You know what we did? Me and some of the contractors went inside that. Okay, let me back up. I was working for the county at the time. It's a possibility that me and some of the contractors went inside the tank, okay, and played football for a little bit. You can get a good arc, and 12 feet, man, you can play football inside these tanks. They're huge. They're absolutely huge, okay? But people, these tanks, we want to look at and we want to be in. So when the guy's in the tank and he's sparking it, we're like, hey, man, what are you doing in there? It's kind of cool. Watch. Except when fuel has gotten behind the liner, because the liner has failed, and they all fail. So when the fuel has gotten behind the liner, and some guy comes with a spark test, what's going to happen? It's going to blow. And trust me, the tank is not going to fly out of the ground. It's not on a movie. This whole thing is not going to have a big rocket. It's not going to happen. But you know what's going to happen? A big ball of fire is going to come up. And fire goes to what? Fire needs what? There's three things for a fire. What do you need? Heat, a source, and oxygen. Where's the oxygen source? The hole that you're looking in. So where's that fireball going to go? It's going to fry you. Okay? Again, going back to the state, when I was with the state, I did a lot of research into this testing method. I hooked up with a guy who's been doing lining inspections for above ground tanks and below ground tanks for 20, 25 years. He was a supervisor, on-field supervisor. He was a good thing. He taught me a lot. I went to multiple sites with him. He died about 4 months after I stopped my research with him because he was up in Oregon doing above ground storage tank lining. He was by his truck about 10 to 15 feet away. The hole in the above ground tank was really close to him. He put supposedly maybe not a intrinsically safe fan inside the tank to ventilate it. It sparked. Fireball came out and killed him from about 10 to 15 feet away. Okay? So understand this for safety. On the tank lining inspections, as an inspector, as an owner-operator, do not be close to that hole. Does that make sense? Because of that spark test, because of that holiday test. All right, moving on. What are these? Holes in tanks. Why does it cause the holes? Corrosion. What about this? Corrosion. This is what corrosion does to tanks. As we get closer to this 2025 single wall tank removal requirement, this is what you're going to see. Is there anyone from San Joaquin in here? San Joaquin County? No? Well, if you are, you don't want to be singled out. Okay? You know how many single wall tanks are in San Joaquin County? 0. Why? They removed them a long time ago. In what do we call it? The 98 upgrades. How many of you guys know what the 98 upgrades are? And for you young kids in there, that was 1998. Okay? It's amazing. You know what? As just kind of a side note, I came here when I was like 24, 25 years old, and I saw these old people up here talking about underground tanks and all that kind of stuff. And now it's as I've gone more into the industry, now I am that old guy up here sitting there talking. I look at you guys are so young. God, you guys, some of these inspectors are so young. So for you young ones, 1998 upgrades, okay? And what happened in 1998 upgrades? It said if you had a single wall steel tank, you had to do what? You had to line it or remove it. Okay? And some people said, I want to line it. I said, okay, but you also had to do, I don't remember exactly what the citation is, but there's a subpart K, that said you have to prove that to line the tank, before you do that, you have to prove that your tank did not what? Leak. And what did everyone say? When you look in your records, what should all you guys see in your records? A self-certification form that says, yes, my tank is not leaking. Have you guys seen these forms before? Look back in your files. Every one of your tanks should have probably some kind of certification. Typically, 95% of them will be self-certifications. So what we did, especially in Sacramento County, what we did is we gave these people, these owner-operators, these forms and said, hey, you know what? Fill out this form. And one of the questions, has your tank leaked? And what did they put? No. All right, you're good? You're good for more? Here, line your tank and we're all good. San Joaquin, they didn't do that. They took it a lot more literally. They said, okay, you have to prove to us that your tank has not leaked. So you have to uncover the top of the tank and you need to do soil samples underneath the tank. That is why San Joaquin has no single wall tanks in their ground. Because the people who tried for soil samples did what? They all failed. There was contamination under 100% of them. Okay? Is that normal? No. I mean, it's typical, but I have pulled single wall tanks out of the ground with no contamination underneath. It's rare, but it does happen. It does happen. Typically, when you see more single wall tanks coming out of the ground, you're going to see a lot of contamination. You're going to see a lot of bad tanks. Okay, fiberglass tanks. This is a fiberglass tank. We need to move on a little bit. So here we go. How do I know this is a fiberglass tank? It has rounded edges and it has ribs. Okay? Now, when this tank goes in the ground, how do I know it's a fiberglass tank? Do I trust the forms? No. Say that again? No. There we go. No, you don't trust your forms. So how do you know? You look inside the hole and you see what? You see ribs. We're good. What else do you see? Wraparound sensor. Or, what's the third thing you can see? Hydrostatic sensor. Hydrostatic liquid. Okay? Any question with that? Should you have hydrostatic monitoring on steel? Why? Because it corrodes. Because it corrodes. Okay? Double wall fiberglass tank. Now, and this is a compartmentalized tank. Understand this, that when you have two tanks that are compartmentalized, or you have two different sides, I don't care if this is 87, I don't care if this is new oil, I don't care if it's diesel, whatever. How many tanks, how many regulated tanks do we have here? Two. We have two regulated tanks. We have one full tank and two regulated tanks. Any questions? How big is your interstitial space on a fiberglass tank? A what? Eighth of an inch? Yeah, something like this big. Okay? Your secondary containment is about this big on a fiberglass tank. Okay? Have you guys ever gone and taken a tour of some of the fiberglass tank manufacturers? You should if you have not. If you are an owner or an operator, if you are an inspector, you should go set up a tour and have them tour to see how these things are made. Because your tank knowledge will greatly increase. All right? You know, how do they make this compartmentalized tank? They make a full tank here, they make half a tank, and they just attach it over. And then they take the secondary tank and they wrap a secondary tank around both. What about the ribs? What are ribs? What?
Reinforcement.
The reinforcement. Why do they have the ribs? For structural support. You put 30,000 gallons of tank of gas in a fiberglass. What's a fiberglass want to do? Blow apart. It doesn't have the structural support. You put these ribs around it, and it gives it the support it needs. Now these ribs, what are these ribs? They're plastic pieces. Like you guys, when you have kids, you know those old school toys with like the snake that has the cuts in it. So you go like this, you move it back and forth, and it kind of goes like this. You know what I'm talking about? Those old school toys. Yeah, it's kind of what the ribs look like. They put these snake-like things around the entire tank, and then they wrap it with the fiberglass. That becomes this interstitial space, and that becomes the area where you put what? What goes in that area? The brine or the sensor, the monitoring components. All right. So now we're going on to piping. Now we've done with everything with tanks. We looked at everything with tanks. Now we're going to piping. Let's go back here. There we go. Fiberglass piping. Fiberglass piping, we know when it's in the ground, it's straight. It has 90s, it has 45, it's rigid fiberglass piping. Any question with this? Typically it's what over what? What over what? Fiberglass over fiberglass. What inch over what inch? 3/2. 3/2. Can be bigger, can be smaller, typically 3/2. Flex pipe. Flex pipe. You notice on flex pipe there is no 90s, there is no 45s. It's just wound about. It is wound about. Now when you're installing this stuff, what you need to know? What the bend radius is. Understand what the bend radius is. What's the bend radius? What does bend radius mean? Exactly. This right here, we're at about a what? A 90% bend radius, right? Is that allowable? Maybe, maybe not. Who tells what's allowable? The manufacturer. Should you check that? Yes, you should check that. Okay? I see this all the time, things that are over 90% or 90 degrees. I see over 90 degrees all the time. You have to ensure that when this tank, because basically once this is covered up, no one will ever know again. No one will ever know again. When you're installing this stuff, make sure you check your bend radiuses. It's something I see wrong all the time. All the time. All right, this type of system. Who could tell me what kind of system, what kind of piping is this? Flex pipe. And what's a special kind of flex pipe is this? What's this system called? What's this system called? Yes, and what's this system called? The what? The loop system. The loop system. Loop system. Why is it called a loop or referred to as a loop system? What's the difference between this and this? Who can tell me?
They're daisy chained together.
What?
They're daisy chained together.
They're daisy chained together. This, you have it coming off the sump into the dispenser. This, come off the sump into the dispenser. Coming off the sump into the dispenser. Right? Here, you have it coming off of 1. Going into dispenser 1, teeing up, going outside the other side of the UDC, and going straight to dispenser number 2. Where it tees up, goes into the dispenser, and goes to what? Number 3. So all these UDCs, all these lines are what? One looped system. Does that make sense? Why is that important? Why is that important? How you regulate this, and I'm not going to get into too deep. How you regulate this and you regulate this are totally different. They're both flex pipe. Is regulated totally different because you have this piece of pipe that goes from dispenser 1 to dispenser 2. You have a piece of pipe that goes from dispenser 2 to dispenser 3. Because of those loop area, the way you regulate it, whether it be a VPH or a tank installed after July 1st, 2004, or a non-VPH, you regulate them totally different. And just to let you know, basically, if it's a loop type system, and we're talking about a system that was installed, it's a non-VPH system, so it's installed before July 1st, 2004, okay? And it's a double wall pressurized system. That means that if they're doing option number 1, basically we'll go over it a little bit later, but basically it says you have to have fail-safe, right? You have to have fail-safe and you have to have positive shutdown. You guys know what these terms are, correct? Especially for my more senior people. And for some of the basic people, we'll get to it a little bit later, but for my senior people, if this is positive shutdown and fail-safe, this dispenser cannot just be activate audible visual alarm or shut down the dispenser. This dispenser has now become basically a sump, basically a pipe monitoring component. It is not just a dispenser monitoring component. This is a pipe monitoring component, and the sensor in here has to be positive shutdown and has to be fail-safe as well. And again, this is something I see wrong all the time. To meet that option, this has now become pipe monitoring, not just dispenser monitoring. This has become pipe monitoring. Any questions so far? Yes?
Is that on each end of the dispenser line, or is that in the middle dispenser zone?
Well, you have to put as, if this is number 1, then no. Because as long as the flow goes from here back to the sump, you're fine. This one could be audible, this one can be thing. And as long as the slope goes from here to here, down to here, then this one has to be pipe monitoring or not. If the slope is, depending on the slope, if the slope goes back to here from the piping, then this one has to be positive shutdown, fail safe. And this one, if the flow is going that way, then this one has to be pipe monitoring for dispenser 2, 3 to number 1 to number 2. Does that make sense? Okay, so you need to know where the flow is going. You need to know where the angle is going. You need to know which one's doing which. But these have to be positive shutdown and fail-safe to meet that requirement. Any other questions? Did I lose anybody? I know I lost my beginning people. But for my more advanced people, did I lose you? All right. All right, what's this called? Trench liner. Should you have this? No. If you have it, remove it. It is illegal, it is illegal, it is illegal. Any questions? Okay. Should you see this in the field? No. Are you going to see in the field? About 8 of you will, because I know of 8 sites still in California that have this, and it is over 11 years non-compliant. What's a typical fine for violations on underground storage tanks? $500 to $5,000 per day per tank. Okay, say this is a typical 3-tank install. Okay, you go minimum, so you go $500 a day minimum, 3 tanks at $1,500 a day for 11 years. How much money is that? Okay. Now, if you're local, I know people say, well, my local is fine with it. My local is fine with it. Okay, that's fine. You got a grace period. However, who can come in and still do a case against you? The feds? Well, actually, it's not a federal requirement, so they can't. The state. The state can. And what do they say? Oh, my local said it's fine. Here, they signed off on it. It's all good. And the state says what? Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. However, here's your $20 million fine for 11 years at $1,500 a day. Okay? Locals cannot give you an exemption for a state requirement. All right. Now, more piping. Okay? These are sumps. Okay? Why do I call them piping? Because they are piping. They're big pieces of pipe. Don't think of them as sumps. Think of them as 48-inch pieces of pipe, because that's what they are. They are big pieces of secondary pipe. Any questions? All right, more sumps. And this is, right away, I've tried to tell you what to look for in the field. How do we know this is a suction system without this saying suction system? How do we know this is a suction system? There's no turbine. There's no turbine. When I started with Sacramento County, they didn't give me a lot of training, and so when I went to my first site, I just kind of went out there and watched what the service tech was doing. Like, oh yeah, everything's good, everything's good. Okay? I went to my first suction system, and there was no turbine. And I'm like, I talked to the guy, I talked to the service tech, I'm like, hey, so where's the turbine? And he goes, well, there's not one. I'm like, oh, okay, that's great, that's great. and then I'm like, so then I came back, I'm like, so how is the pressure working? He's like, it's not a suction system. I'm like, okay, great. So then I go back and I call there's 4 other people on the team. So I call the other 4 people on the team. And I said, what is a suction system? What are the requirements of a suction system? What is a suction system? And they're like, we'll talk about that when we get back into the office. I'm like, all right, good. So I go back to the office and I bring one of our senior inspectors. I said, so what's the requirements of suction system? And I said, what is a suction system? And he said, basically, he goes, well, it's where the fuel gets sucked instead of pushed. I'm like, okay, that's great, thank you. So what are the requirements of a suction system? And he's like, well, let's look. And so they broke open the regulations, and they're like, no. And basically because they had dealt with everything that my team had typically dealt with was major oil, which are all double wall pressurized. They gave me there's 4 people doing major oil, and they gave me the whole county that was not a convenience store. So I had backup generators, I had construction sites, I had everything that was not a major oil site. And so I came across a lot of these, and I had to kind of pretty much teach myself, and I hooked in with like 4 or 5 different really good service techs and had them teach me what to do. And we know this is a suction system because there is no turbine. And the way the suction system works, it does get sucked. There is a turbine. Pressure system and a suction system are exactly the same. Okay? Is a pressurized system, if this has a turbine right here, if I put a turbine right here, is there a suction component? Yes, it's a suction system and a pressure system. Okay? Because how does it get the fuel out of the tank? It sucks the fuel up into the turbine and then pushes it under pressure down in the piping. So a pressure system is also a suction system, right? And then when you take the turbine and you take it off the top of the tank, you put it down by the dispenser or down by the backup generator, you put the turbine deeper into the piping, then how is the fuel coming out of the tank and in the piping? By suction, right? So all you're doing is taking the turbine, the suction portion from the top of the tank, and you're putting it down line. Does that make sense? Now, this is a special kind of suction system. This is hooked to what kind of system? Context clues. Context clues. When you look at this, you should, without the sign here, you should say, this is a suction system hooked to what kind of system? Generator. Emergency generator. How do you know this is an emergency generator? 2 lines. 2 lines. You have one line here with a supply line, you have a return line. Supply and return, supply and return. Which one's which? Who knows? I can't tell from this picture. Okay? But one is a return line and one's a supply line. One going to the backup generator and one coming from the backup generator. Now, a lot of your backup generators will not have return lines anymore. Why? Why did a lot of people remove return lines? Monitoring them, yeah, a little bit. What was that? Yeah. There was a huge removal of return lines at about 2003, 2004. Why? What came around 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004? Secondary containment testing. Secondary containment testing. Okay? And if you have a supply line, say this is a safe suction line. Say this is a supply line and this is safe suction. Okay? Now, under a law or regulation, there's no monitoring requirements for the safe suction. However, this return line is what? Is it safe suction? What is it? It's gravity. Is there requirements for gravity flow piping? Yes, there are. Okay? So this secondary pipe right here doesn't have to be tested because of this safe suction line. It only has to be tested because of this gravity flow return. Are return lines required on a backup generator system? No, they're just a benefit. So to get out of secondary containment testing, what would you do? Cut the line here, cut the line back at the gen, pull it out, and now you only have one supply line. That's a safe suction. Do you have to do secondary containment testing? No. Why did they want to get out of secondary containment testing for backup gens? Because they knew they were going to fail. Straight out, they knew they were going to fail. They didn't want to do all the repairs. They didn't want to work. So what's the easiest thing to do? You cut the line here. You cut the line upstream, and you pull out that return line. You pull this return line out, and now you have a safe suction system. You do not have to do secondary containment testing. Any question with that? What happens if this was a conventional? Say this is this supply line here. Say this is conventional. And a conventional suction system. Do you have monitoring requirements for it? Yes, you do. Do you have to do secondary containment for it? Yes, you do. So do you have to do secondary containment testing? Yes, you do. So now if I'm a backup generator, I have a conventional suction system with a return line, and I want to get out of secondary containment testing because you know what? I know I'm going to fail. I'm a big corporation. I have a lot of backup generators. 90% are going to fail. What do? I pull out the foot valve or the inline check valve of the conventional suction system. That makes it what? Safe suction. I remove the return line, and now I've taken a double-walled conventional suction system with a return line that is required to do secondary containment testing, and I've made it into, with those two steps, I made it into a safe suction system with no return and no secondary containment testing. Boom, I am done. Is that a lot cheaper? It's a lot cheaper. Any questions? All right, turbines. This means we have what kind of system? Pressurized system. What is this thing right here? This right here and this right here. What is this called? Give it to me. Line leak detector. Line leak detector. What type of line leak detector is it? It's a what? Electronic line leak detector. How do I know this is an electronic line leak detector? Because I trust my forms? No. Then what? Because the wire. Because it has a wire going to it. Has a wire going to it. If it's a mechanical line leak detector, there's going to be no wire. All right, so now we've done tanks. We've done a little bit of piping. Now we have here's more piping. What kind of piping is this? Right now, tell me real quick. Move. Double wall, fiberglass, rigid. Okay, double wall, fiberglass, rigid. That should have popped in your head the first thing you saw. What is this thing right here? Boom. Test boot. What do we use test boots for? For testing. I like that. Testing. We use it for testing. Yes, for what kind of testing? Secondary containment testing. Now, before 2001, 2002, 2003, if I saw this on a system, I would say, what are you up to? I go to the owner operator. You are messing with my system. Why do you have that boot there? Why do you have the boot there? Cut that boot off. Cut that thing off. Why? Because there's no need for it. There was no need for this testing boot. There was no need for it. The only thing you could use for that testing boot was to put it on this piping and then have no monitoring. Does that make sense? Back in those days, there was no need for this boot except to mess with the system by putting this on here and isolating that pipe. So my sump sensor here never got activated. Does that make sense? So if I saw this back in 2000, 2001, I'm like, I'd go to the owner operator and I'd have a little talk. Hey, what's going on with my system? Why do you have this boot here? You're messing with my system. As soon as I leave, I know you're putting that thing back on. Okay? Why does every site have them on now? Secondary containment testing. Now it's a requirement, okay? But it's different back then than it is today. Because now what they had to do is all these sites that all the regulators had them cut off, they had to put back on. Because at some point you have to isolate this pipe for testing. Now, how many of you guys go out to sites and owner operators, how many times you go into your DO reports and you look at this kind of stuff and you say, hey, this boot is on this pipe, is on this pipe. Is that a violation? Okay, let me qualify this for the people who know a lot about it. Let's say this boot is on this, the shear valve is intact and the shear valve is on top. Does that make sense? Now is it a violation? Yes, it is a violation. Okay? Again, I preach about this every year at the CUPA conference. Every time I do a test, every time I do a training, I harp on this. I harp on this, harp. And I still see it. I still see it. Okay? I need to bring like a, what do those old teachers have? Like those sticks? Those, I need to start bringing that out. Okay? Because I still see these boots on and the shear valve with the inside of the shear valve still on and the shear valve up on top. Thank you. Not shear valve. Straighter valve. Straighter valve. Straighter valve. What happens? What leaks more? Tanks or pipe? Pipes leak a lot more. A lot more. So when you put this boot on and all the leak, how does this work? This goes on downward angle, right? Our pipe is installed down angle, so everything flows. It leaks out of the primary pipe into the secondary pipe. By gravity, it runs down into the sump. It accumulates in the sump and activates the alarm. Okay? When this boot is on this pipe, can that liquid touch the sensor? And you have what? No monitoring. No pipe monitoring. Is that a significant violation? Is there any difference between having this boot on here and having the boot off with the sensor way up here? Is there any difference? People always say, oh, lifted sensor, lifted sensor, lifted sensor, right? Everyone's all on about the lifted sensors, right? You guys all, you know what I'm talking about, lifted sensors, right? The sensor, everything's like this, it's all good, except the sensor is not here where it's supposed to be, it's tied way up here. So it doesn't activate the alarm, right? Lifted sensor, right? We got it? Everyone's like, oh, lifted sensor, lifted sensor. But then they're like, oh, well, the boot's just on. It's the same thing. It is 100% the same violation. If you don't want to get a lifted sensor violation, what do? Put the boot on. Same thing. And then you don't get a lifted sensor violation. Then you don't get into what? What's a T word? Tampering. Oh, tampering. That's not tampering. This is tampering. You put the boot on there, it's tampering. It's the same thing. It's the same violation. Yes?
I would say the secondary containment tester people, they like to leave it on there because when they come back 3 years later, it's all set up.
Yes, 100%. And what every time. Okay. Oh, so this is. Are you a regulator or owner? Oh, okay, they're good. Okay, I'm not picking on you. I'm not picking on you. Not picking on your owners. So when I go to this is good. This is good stuff. I like this stuff. See how I get all passionate about this stuff? All right. So when I go to these sites and they have this boot on, they're like, oh, come on, John. My tester was just out here 2 years ago, right? And they left the boot on. Okay. We move it off. Or they say, oh, John, you know what? It was only a couple of weeks ago they test the secondary containment test. Here's the results. They forgot to put the boot off. Okay. Now, When I go to a site and they say I have a lifted sensor strung up here, what's the same owners tell me? Well, John, I just had a monitoring cert a couple weeks ago, and they forgot to put the sensors what? Back down. Right? Isn't that the same? Is this new information, or has everyone gotten this information, same thing? We get the same stuff. And I'm not, and owner operators, I am not accusing you guys of anything. I'm really not. And a lot of the times, don't get me wrong, a lot of times the service techs do leave these on. And again, going back to service techs, do I have any service techs in here? Okay, so we can talk a little bit. Well, again, I can't talk because two reasons. I have a boss, like I work for, I'm in Sac County role. I'm not in my other thing, I'm in Sac County role. So I have a boss, so I have to be thing. Number two is I'm on tape, so I can't say anything that's gonna get me in trouble. However, service techs get paid how? Per hour, per job. Per job. So what do you need to watch? Owners, what do you need to watch? Regulators, what do you need to watch? You need to watch the per job mentality. Now, does it benefit a service tech for keeping that boot on there so next time when he comes back to do a test, it's already there? Does that make it good for him? Yes, it does. Does that benefit him? Yes, it does. Okay. The Caldwell system for secondary containment testing. You guys know what the Caldwell system is? We'll talk about this in a little bit. But the Caldwell system for secondary containment testing is where you have it's a hydrostatic test that you put in Sumps and USTs with a fishing bobber on a stick inside a PVC pipe. You guys know what I'm talking about? And what they do is there's a piece of plastic with 5 concentric circles moving out from a T. And what they do is they put that fishing bobber in the middle of the T, and they put their feet right here, and they look down and make sure that fishing bobber is right in the middle of that T. And then they leave it. And they come back either half an hour later or an hour later or whatever. Okay? And they go back here and they look back down and they look at the the fishing bobber has moved 1 circle. So is that a pass or a fail? It's a pass. I think 3 circles is a fail, correct? 2 circles or 3 circles is a fail, something like that. And you know what? I've looked at that system. That system is a very, 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 very good, very accurate mechanical system. But there's a huge room for error. And what is that error? What was that? What's that over here? You don't look in the same spot. Okay? Your feet have to be exactly right here. Your head has to be exactly at the same angle. You have to be looking exactly straight down. Now going back to my service techs and my per job Friday afternoon, it's hot, you're in Imperial County, it's like 120 degrees, right? You want to go home? Now you see let's say 3 circles is a fail. I don't know if it's 2 or 3, but let's say 3 circles is a fail. He looks back down after an hour of testing and he sees it moved 3.5, 4 circles. That's a what? That's a fail. Now what do they have to go do? Back and look, back and try to figure out what's going on. Unless you go like this. And you move back a little bit like this. And now that 4 circles has become what? 3 circles. And what do we got? We got a pass, right? Boom, we're out. We pass, we're good. I'm out per job. So is what my owners here saying is true? Sometimes is it service techs who leave these kind of things on to benefit them? Do they accidentally leave sensors strung high because they forgot to put them down for monitoring system? Is that a true fact? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. How do we know if it was tampering, deliberate tampering, or if it was accident? We don't know. And that's why when you throw the word tampering out, you better be good for a regulator. You better be understanding, because once it goes into tampering, it goes from $500 to $5,000 per day per tank to what? $5,000 to $10,000 per day per tank and or year in jail. It actually goes criminal. Okay? So when you throw that tampering word out, you better have proof that who did it. If not, is it still a violation? Yeah, it's still a violation. And owners say, John, well, they left it down. And I say, well, owner operator, I'm sorry, but it's still your job. It's still your responsibility. Your contractor came in and did it, left it high, left the boot on. You got to face a fine for it. But once you go to tampering, it's a whole nother level. Hold on, I'll get you. Yes?
It's okay to leave the boot on as long as it's straight or about it.
Okay. Yes. Now, if this boot on, see how we have like a foot and a half here? Some of your old systems were not, they had no idea of secondary containment. They had no thought about secondary containment. When I was starting, 2001, I went to a symposium at the State Water Board. And the State Water Board came up in the podium and they said, you know what? We're going to require secondary containment testing for all secondary components. And everybody stood up. Regulators stood up. Industry stood up. Owner-operator stood up. I know a regulator who stood up and just red-faced. That is the stupidest, dumbest requirement I've ever seen in my life. Why could you do that? Blah, 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 and just totally berated the entire program. Now we're kind of on the opposite end. Now we're kind of saying, hey, secondary containment is very viable and it's an amazing thing, right? We all like secondary containment, right? Yeah, testing, yes, it's just a good thing. But back then, there was no thought or no component about secondary containment testing. So you might not have a foot and a half here. Your turbine might be right here. You don't have room to pull this boot back to open it up. So what do? You take the inside of the Schrader valve out, so it's a big hole. You turn this boot downward so it still will allow fluid to come in, go out the hole, down into the sump, and activate the alarm. So that's 100% legal, 100% compliant. When you do your secondary containment test, when you do your monitoring system certification, you need to take care of your tech, tell your service tech, go in there and make sure that that Schrader valve is down and there's nothing inside. Now, do you physically go down there and check? You want to, you can. I'm fine with, hey, talking to service tech, can you make sure the Schrader valve's out? He goes down there, yeah, it's out. I'm good with it. I take their word for it. But it's up to you. Okay, but yeah, that's 100% legal, 100% legal. Yes, go back to you.
I was just going to say, if you are a owner, you really do need to check on your service techs to make sure they're not being sloppy.
I agree, 100%, 100%. When this goes with service technicians and for designated operators. Designated operators, okay? Who has authority, and again, this is kind of going above, but I like the discussion. Who has authority over a designated operator? The person who signed their paycheck, which is who? The owner-operator. Does a regulator or does an inspector have any authority over a designated operator? No, not one thing, not one thing. Okay, unless you can prove that the designated operator tampered with the system, because on tampering it says any person. So unless you can prove the DO tampered with something, then you have no authority over it. Okay? So as an owner-operator, I 100% say yes, you need to know your service techs and you need to know your designated operators. Okay, moving on. Line detectors. What kind of line detector is this? Mechanical. How do we know? No wires and a copper tube. What is this again? It's turbine. What's this? Sensors. What's this? Flex connectors. Okay, big on-site, big pH. Let me see. Sensors. We have all different kinds of sensors. We have sensors back here. Okay, we have sensors that are 3 foot long. We have sensors that are only 2 inches long. Okay, all different kinds of sensors. Now look here. What kind of sensor? Where do you find this? Sump. What's the difference between these two? Why is one big and one small? Discriminating sensors. This discriminates between what and what? Water and fuel. What is this? Wraparound sensor. Now, when we get to wraparound sensors, understand, when they pull this out of the tank, do you need to watch it? Do they have to pull this out of the tank? Yes, they do. Do you need to look at the sensor? Yes, you do. Just pulling it up and activating alarm is not enough. You need to pull out the sensor and check it. Why do you need to check it? Because you need to make sure that it is the right way. If it's upside down, it's not going to work. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Where do you typically see this little sensor, bell sensor here? In what? Steel tanks and your space. Sometimes you see them in sumps. Sometimes you see them in VPH sumps. And what about this sensor here? What's special about this sensor here? Has what? Tamper sensor right here. What does that tamper sensor do? You lift it up, it does what? Shuts down the system, shuts down the turbine. Positive shutdown. You lift it up, and now, where is the requirement for that? Where is the requirement to have a sensor, as soon as it's lifted up, to go into alarm or go to positive shutdown? There is none. Why do we have it? Was what? Why do we have it?
Because the owner-operator is tired of finding it, maybe? And
100% right. 100% right. Okay? When we talk about different things in here, we talk about what comes down to the bottom line. The bottom line is always what? Money. You've heard this as a cliche. I'm telling you it's true. In USTs, it comes down to, everything comes down to money. Now, when did the AO program start? About 11 years ago. Has there been a lot of UST enforcement since then? Yes, there has. Now, we have authority over 2 different people as regulators. Who are those 2 different people? Owners and operators. Does the owner-operator, can they be the same person? Can they be different? Are they both liable? Yes. Okay. So is the owner liable for what the operator does? Yes. And we had major oil corporations who were tired of paying fines because their operators were lifting sensors. So they went to different companies and different monitoring companies and said, give me a sensor that will shut down my turbine so my operators cannot do what? What's the term? Lift the sensors. Lift the sensors, right? So industry came out. This is an industry thing. It's not a requirement at all. At all. Okay? That came straight from industry because they were tired of paying fines for lifted sensors. So now what do they do instead of lifting sensors? They just leave the boot on. Right? Tell me that's not the same tell me that's not the same violation. It's the same violation. Absolutely same violation. All right. I'll stop. Get off my soapbox on that. ATG, automatic tank gauge. Okay? These are inside the tank. There's 2 levels, 2 floats, water float and product float. They tell you how much water and product are in the tank. They're connected to the monitoring panel, and they can be connected to an audible visual alarm for overfill prevention. Automatic tank gauges can do a lot of different things. They can do testing. They can do overfill alarms. They can do tons of different things. Typical ATG, lay on the ground. Now understand, how do they get this big stick out of the tank and out of here? They take this little piece off here. They disconnect it from the monitoring panel. They lift it all the way out. They make sure nothing spills, right? They lay it down, and then they roll up this, the product float to about whatever they want to. Do they ever measure? Of course they measure. Of course they make sure that's exactly where they need to go, right? They throw it up there somewhere, and it goes into alarm. Then what do? You disconnect it again from the monitoring panel here. You pick it back up, you put it back in the tank, and you connect it again. All that connection and deconnection from the monitoring panel sometimes has a negative effect on these automatic tank gauges. You can fry them. Frankly, you can fry the motherboard of the monitoring panel as well. Okay? So, why do I tell you that? Because you need, as a regulator and as an owner-operator, you need to know when is it required to pull this out and test it and when is it not. If this automatic tank gauge is part of your overfill prevention method, like here, where it's connected to an audible visual alarm, an external audible visual alarm, then yes, it's required to be pulled out and tested.
there's no mechanical overfill prevention.
If this is your primary overfill prevention method, if it's the one that's listed on your monitoring plan, then yes. If there's 2 listed on your monitoring plan, they can test both because you listed both. If you just on your monitoring plan, if you list the one mechanical, your flapper, then they can't pull this. That's true. That's true. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Going back to my tank forms, you're right. Going back to the tank forms. If you're listing both, then it's possible you can be tested. If it's not, if you only list the mechanical, then it's not. Okay? But if you require, as a inspector, if you require them to test this and it's not required, who's kind of liable? And it breaks, who's kind of liable? Or I'm not even saying you might be liable. I'm saying is there going to be a question of liability? Yes, there's a question. There could be a question of liability. So understand, if this is a single wall tank and they're doing automatic tank gauging, monitoring, does this automatic tank gauge have to be tested? Yes, it does. Okay? But like she said, the owner said, if she has dual types of overfill prevention methods, a flapper valve and automatic tank gauge connected to an audible visual alarm, and they have listed just the mechanical on their forms, do you have authority to pull this out and have it tested? I would say no, unless there's something else going on.
Some people have policies.
Again, I don't want to get into that. That was accusatory. We're not going there. Okay? Yes.
I've been out to sites where they actually have a mechanical from prevention, and I spoke to the technical on the road, and I said, it's on the monitoring plan, they listed the clapper valve. Oh, but it's in my.
And that is not you requiring it. That's my point. If they want to test it as part of their testing protocol, that's between the owner-operator and the service tech. No, just make it very clear. Just make it very clear. I did, and when people would do this kind of stuff, like, how many guys are fire CUPAs? Raise your hand. How many guys are health CUPAs? Raise your hand. There's a lot more health in here right now. Okay. Now, do you have any authority over what is it? Fail stop? Not fail stop. The E-stop. The E-stop. Emergency stop. Do you have any authority over it? No. And so you just go, oh, make sure, go hit that E-stop and make sure everything shuts down. And it shuts down, you're like, great, but what happens when it doesn't come back? Is there a question of liability there? Yeah, because there might be, because that's a fire code issue. That is not an environmental health issue. That is not a UST chapter 6.7 issue. Does that make sense? So you might have questions of liability on that. When people say, oh, it's testing part of my protocol, I'm like, okay, hold on. Before you test the E-stop, understand this. I am not telling you or requiring you to test that E-stop. If it's part of you and your testing protocol between you and your owner, hey, fine. But understand this, I'm not telling you to do it. Same thing with automatic tank gauge. Hey, I'm not telling you to do this. Just make it clear. Make it clear. Yes, before we go on break.
Yeah, I'm sorry, so just so I understand then, at an annual certification then, the ESO is not?
If you are not a fire CUPA, chapter 6.7 does not have any, or Title 23 does not have anything to do with E-stop. All right, 15-minute break. Thank you guys, you're doing good so far.